починати. Ми не можемо вийти на зв'язок з Тетяною Сліпачук, тому я думаю, що вже варто починати. А мікрофон не вмикається. Да, вже.
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
Kiev?
Yes, we
Are
can hear
you
you.
waiting for one more speaker?
Yes, still waiting, but I think we should start because it's 10 minutes past the time we should have started.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you for coming late on Friday. I want to actually a good morning for everybody here in Washington. Good afternoon, almost evening in Brussels, Kiev, Europe. I want to welcome my colleagues on the screen in Kiev and in Brussels. Excuse me. My name is Jonathan Katz. I'm a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund in the United States in Washington. I'm also the co-chair of the Friends of Ukraine's Ukraine Network's Democracy and Civil Society Task Force. I want to, first and foremost, just thank all my colleagues at GMF and also both in Brussels, also Ukraine Crisis Media Center, Reanimation Package Reform, and others who work to put this event together. And we're pleased all of you could join us for the second meeting of the Transatlantic Task Force on Elections and Civil Society in Ukraine, which, as we've stated before, is focused on the upcoming Ukrainian presidential and parliamentary elections in 2019, as well as Kiev's ongoing reform efforts, including efforts to combat corruption and support for civil society. One of the primary goals of the task force, in addition to what I mentioned, is to strengthen transatlantic security and economic cooperation with Ukraine and to cooperatively address ongoing Russian aggression. So while our discussion today was primarily intended to focus on the serious challenge of cybersecurity, particularly as it relates to Ukraine's democracy and integrity of the upcoming Ukrainian elections in 2019, we want to spend just a few minutes to address the recent attack on Ukrainian ships in the Azov Sea. As all of you know, renewed Russian aggression, again this time in the Sea of Azov, has been the primary concern and focus of Ukraine, the United States, and the international community over the last several days. Russia's attack on Ukrainian naval vessels in the Azov Sea this past Sunday was not only a serious military provocation that has been condemned by leaders internationally, but also a renewed violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and international law. It also impacts the security of the United States, the European Union, and NATO, including those member states on the Black Sea concerned about increased Russian aggression close to their shores. I think we all call on Russia to stand down from additional military provocation, immediately release Ukrainian military personnel, return Ukrainian ships, and ensure the Kerch Strait shipping lanes are open. The Trump administration, as many of you know, has condemned the attack, and President Trump has said he will not meet with President Putin at the G20 meeting in Buenos Aires, which has started. I applaud the president's decision. I think others do as well, not to meet with Putin at this moment. I also want to point out and applaud the effort of the U.S. Senate, which passed a resolution yesterday, which I'll just hold up, really also I think echoing the same statements of the administration, opposing the action that took place, but also calling for additional action to address what took place a few days ago. And I thought it was particularly important that we raise this, and also for our colleagues in Kiev to know that there's a great deal of support, obviously, for Ukraine at this moment in Washington, in some sense, unprecedented levels of support. And I think this issue will play out over the next several weeks in terms of how people respond to what took place. But I think most important that there's a great deal of solidarity with Ukraine at this moment. In addition, Russia's actions in the Azov Sea are also impacting Ukraine domestically. We understand that. As you all know, the government of Ukraine, including the parliament, decided to impose martial law for 30 days in 10 provinces to combat, quote, growing aggression from Russia. I think the events of the past week in Ukraine are reshaping the political landscape in Ukraine and could impact Ukrainian elections in 2019, which I'm sure my colleagues in Kiev are thinking a lot about this week, probably having spent a lot of sleepless hours trying to figure out how they should be responding and engaging from civil society at this moment. So for our discussion, I think it's important to know how martial law will impact the upcoming local, parliamentary, and presidential elections. What is the role of civil society in responding to Russian aggression, and its role in ensuring that Ukraine's elections move forward unfettered in 2019. I understand that President Poroshenko has vowed that the imposition of martial law would not mean a postponement of the presidential vote. I understand that the date has been set for the presidential election officially, which I think is important, but it's something certainly that we're all watching here, because we know that there's a delicate balance between ensuring security and then ensuring democracy at the same time. And so this is an important issue, I think, that we'll likely be addressing over the coming months as the task force continues to meet and address these challenges. Today's event, of course, will focus on the serious challenge of cybersecurity. And we all know about the vulnerabilities of Ukraine's election system. Previously, we know that civil society has made a number of recommendations to the CEC, and we're deeply appreciative to have the head of the CEC with us. And I think I'll let my colleague Oris pick up from where I'm leaving off, but I wanted to just highlight the election reforms roadmap that civil society, including reanimation package reforms, had laid out in September, and how important it is. And of course, in our room here today in Washington, we have a number of U.S. government officials who are deeply involved in all aspects of the relationship with Ukraine, including election-related work in the lead up to the presidential parliamentary elections. So I think we have the right group of people here in Washington who are listening carefully to your concerns, thoughts, suggestions, and also how can the United States, Europe, since we have colleagues in Brussels as well that are also following this and are participating today, how can they be more supportive to ensure that Ukraine's elections are safe, free, and are able to address cybersecurity concerns? Boris, can I hand it over to you?
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. I think I'm just going to slightly build on some of what you said. Thanks to all of you and welcome. And we are very fortunate to be able to hear from our speakers in Kyiv, not only will hopefully show up from the Central Election Commission, which indeed plays the central role of elections for Ukraine, but also from OPORA and IFES, who have long been key players in terms of elections in Ukraine. And I know this a little bit from my previous job at the Helsinki Commission, where we interacted a lot, both your organizations. And a big thanks to Olena for pulling all this together. Last Sunday's attack was undoubtedly a very serious act of unprovoked aggression aimed at destabilizing Ukraine. In the elections, it's part of the ongoing hybrid war, cybersecurity aspect, which speakers in Kyiv will address. Just want to join in what Jonathan said by saying there really has been a lot of attention to what happened. Putin's nobody buys what Putin's saying in terms of his assessment of what happened, and there's a lot of solidarity from the Congress. But I've also noticed a real uptick in attention from the media, which is good and important. Well, let me share just 4 thoughts with respect to Ukraine's response to all this. One is, I think it's important for everybody to recognize and underscore that martial law was approved by a legitimate, democratically elected parliament. And the Rada scaled back the proposal limiting the duration and scope and geographic reach. And it appears that the election, Jonathan said, will not be proposed as many had feared, but this is far any other egregious aggressive act. So, you can't exclude anything at this point in time. Number 2, the Ukrainian government needs to respond to Russia's flagrant aggression in a way that preserves the rights and freedoms of its citizens. We welcome assurances that constitutional rights will not be breached. Martial law, I think, should be used only to counter clear Russian threats. And it is appropriate and even incumbent for civil society to monitor martial law's impact on society. And we can't forget that, any real attacks on civil society will only play into Putin's hands. Number three, I hope that during the election campaign, this is really expressing a hope more than anything. This isn't something that could be legislated or mandated, but that candidates, and the political class in Ukraine in general, try to refrain from the politicization of national security issues to the extent possible. Obviously, that's not easy to do in the heat of a political campaign, but Russia is cronies in Ukraine will try to exploit differences, including through malign cyber activity. Vigorous political competition is normal in a democratic society, but I just hope that everyone, including Ukraine's friends and supporters outside of Ukraine, keeps in mind just who it is that poses the existential threat to Ukraine. And finally, a successful election will be one that not only reduces vulnerabilities such as cyber attacks, disinformation, one that's also free, fair, open, and transparent. And given Russia's latest act of aggression, an election that meets international democratic standards arguably is now more important than ever. So that would be Jonathan.
Great. I want to send it over to Olena in Kiev, and I don't know if you've any update on Tetiana, whether it's going to make it in timing, but I thought best, given we have a set time, that probably should turn it over to you, and then we'll introduce the two speakers right now. But I know that you wanted to weigh in as well on what took place this past week, including the issues both of what took place in the Sea of Azov, but also martial law and the political climate in Ukraine right now.
Dear colleagues and guests in Kiev, Washington, and Brussels, thank you very much for joining us today for the second meeting of the Transatlantic Task Force on Elections and Civil Society in Ukraine. As Jonathan mentioned, although the event is dedicated to the cybersecurity issues and threats, this week international attention has been captured by another type of threat Ukraine is facing, and this type of threat is certainly no less alarming. Ukraine is making international headlines again, and not for a good reason. And before we start with the discussion of the cybersecurity threats, I'd like to give a brief update on the developments around the Azov Sea escalation, and then we can proceed to the main topic of our discussion. And before I do that, can you hear us in Washington and Brussels? Seems like the connection has been broken.
We can still hear you.
You can still hear us.
It's good.
Good, because we cannot see you anymore, but yeah. So the update on Tetiana, we just received a message that the head of the Central Election Commission will not be able to participate, which is very unfortunate, but we still have a very distinguished panel of speakers, and I hope we will have a productive discussion on the cybersecurity issues. Then, Jonathan, would you please introduce our speakers, and then I'll continue with the Azov Sea escalation developments.
Hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, just want to make sure. And Olga Aivazovska, is that right?
Olha Aivazovska.
Okay, thank you. Olga, sorry about that. Is the head of the board of Civil Network of OPORA, civil society organization that has been catalyzing change in Ukraine by engaging citizens in decision-making and fighting for the protection of voting rights and transparent electoral process. She has participated in electoral observations in more than 10 countries across Europe, and also represents Ukraine in the Trilateral Contact Group addressing the conflict in eastern Ukraine. She's a member of the National Unity Council under the President of Ukraine, and a board member of the Ukrainian think tank's liaison office in Brussels and Belgium. And Thomas Chanussot currently serves as a working cybersecurity and technology advisor at the Ukrainian office of IFES, and which is the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. He has been working in the field of elections since 2004. He's been involved in more than 12 electoral operations in diverse roles, including development, security audit, and management. He's worked extensively on mission-critical electoral systems, designing, securing electoral voter list databases, and result management, and working as a project manager for a European NGO in 2012 and 13. He developed expertise in cybersecurity and website resilience against state-sponsored cyber attacks, which is appropriate for obviously for the conversation we're having. And prior to joining Ukrainian branch of IFES, he served IFES in Myanmar, Papua New Guinea, and Indonesia. So I wanted to just thank them for participating, and of course, a bit disappointed that we do not have the head of the CEC participating, but we hope that that at another point in time, we'll be able to have Tetiana join us. So over to you, Olena.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. And again, we will definitely try another time to get Tetiana on the panel with us, because not only cybersecurity issues, but generally the prospects of the electoral reform and the reform of the CEC particularly is on top of Ukraine's agenda. So back on the Azov Sea escalation, as you know, on Sunday, November 25th, Russian Coast Guard patrol boats opened fire and seized 3 Ukrainian naval ships on the grounds that they allegedly refused to stop navigating the Kerch Strait, connecting the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea. As of now, 24 Ukrainian Marines who were on the boats remain detained, including 6 of them who have been wounded. According to the latest information we've seen in the media from the Ukrainian ombudsman, all of them have been sent from the Crimea to the detention facilities in Moscow. 3 Ukrainian vessels attacked by Russians have not been returned to Ukraine. And Ukrainian authorities have made official statements calling this attack the act of aggression. They called the Russian authorities to return the Marines and to return them safely, and to give Ukraine control over the seized vessels back, to return those vessels. They also called on the international community to apply new sanctions and to send their observers and their warships to the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov and the Kerch Strait region to prevent further escalation by the Russian Federation. Notably, Ukrainian authorities have also emphasized that the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is a project not in the interests of Europe, but in the interests of the Russian Federation. And why it's important in this context is because experts suggest that Russia will use Nord Stream 2 pipeline protection as an excuse to expand its presence in the territorial waters of the respective countries. So this is something to watch out for as well. A number of governments and international organizations have already condemned this act of aggression by Russia, including the United States, Canada, Germany, and NATO. As Jonathan mentioned, President Trump has canceled his meeting with Putin at the G7 summit in Argentina. German Chancellor Merkel, at the meeting with the Ukrainian Prime Minister, Volodymyr Groysman, stated that she would be raising the issue of Azov Sea escalation at the G20 summit, where she will arrive later than planned due to her airplane failure. As to the EU, the head of the European diplomacy, Federica Mogherini, said that the European Union was dismayed by Russia's use of force and described it as unacceptable. She said that the EU would act appropriately in formulating its response in coordination with the other international partners. So that's all we have from the European Union as of now. One of the most frequently asked questions we're hearing these days is why now? And some experts, particularly Mikhailo Honchar, suggest that Russia had been waiting for the opportunity to escalate the conflict with Ukraine, since it recently suffered a number of international defeats, from the Skripal case to uncovering of Russian agents in Russian hackers in the Netherlands, to the prospective autonomy to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So according to Honchar, Russia is using the Azov Sea escalation to prove the West that it still is powerful, and to also test the Ukrainian reaction and the reaction of the international community. And it is also expected that Russia will use the sailors as a bargaining chip in further trades with Ukraine, and also to put the pressure on the Ukrainian government. Thus, we believe that without the strong international reaction and response, the tensions may only grow. As to the martial law, following President Poroshenko's decree, the Parliament of Ukraine adopted the law on the introduction of the martial law for 30 days from November 26 to December 26, which means that if not expanded for longer term, presidential campaign should start as planned, which is on December 31st. Besides, the introduction of the martial law will likely result, will not result in the immediate military mobilization. It is declared in 10 regions. Those are the regions bordering with Russia and Moldova, and those in the coasts of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. According to the law, on the legal status of the martial law for the period while the martial law is in force, some rights and liberties can be limited, those that are provided by the Constitution, and they include the electoral rights, the right of peaceful assembly, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, privacy of correspondence and dwelling place, and also private property rights. Since this is the first time since Ukraine's independence when the martial law is introduced, it's still difficult to forecast the actual procedure and the actual practice of how it will be implemented, and of course it's very difficult to forecast the consequences. What we do know now is that yesterday the Border Guard Service of Ukraine has already banned entry of foreign citizens to Crimea due to the martial law, and human rights organizations are very critical about this decision of the Ukrainian government because they believe that the presence of the foreign media, the presence of human rights organizations and lawyers who are defending political prisoners in Crimea is very critical at the moment, so we hope that this decision will be reversed. We also know that due to the martial law, local elections in the unified communities scheduled for December 23rd this year will have to be postponed until next year. And it is yet to be decided which procedure will apply to the resumption of the electoral process. This is one of the issues we hoped to discuss with the head of the Central Election Commission, but we can probably still discuss it with Olha and Thomas. We will be closely following the enforcement of the martial law in Ukraine, and will report on any restrictions that the civil society believes to be unjustified or ill-grounded. We would also request our international partners to monitor the developments in this regard and to react to any potential abuses of the civil rights and liberties in the 10 respective regions of Ukraine. More importantly, it would be very useful to hear from Washington and Brussels audiences about the discussions that are now happening among the policymakers and opinion makers regarding this alarming situation in the Azov Sea and about the response that we may expect in the coming weeks from the US government and the EU governments in terms of sanctions, new sanctions against Russia, in terms of extended military support and other measures to stop the aggression and to basically raise the price of this aggression for Russia. With this, I would like to give the floor to Thomas. As we know, as we said multiple times, international partners remain our strongest supporters in promoting reforms in Ukraine, and election reform and cybersecurity measures are no exception. In June this year, International Foundation for Electoral Systems, which Thomas represents, made a comprehensive assessment of the cybersecurity of Ukrainian electoral process and infrastructure. So I would like to give you the floor and to hear from you what was your assessment and how ready Ukraine is to the upcoming elections. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So as you were saying, so IFES has been working in Ukraine since 1984. So more recently, we have started to work a bit more extensively in cybersecurity as it became a much more concern to everybody. The assessment that was made in June by the IFES team really covers all of the holistic view of the threats and the issues that the CEC could face in the cybersecurity area. The recommendations that have been made during the assessment were actually part of the roadmap. So I will quickly go through the different recommendations that have been made, and some of them have quite a lot of quite a lot of activities have already been made. The first recommendation was on the training on cybersecurity, and that's an area where there has been a lot of effort that has been made. A cyber hygiene training has been created by IFES, and the CEC is already trained. More than half of the staff has already been trained, and we expect that before the end of the year, all of the staff will have been trained. Next year, the DECs, so the regional offices, who are created, I think, a few days before the election, I think 40 days before the election, will also be trained. We see this as a really important, because vulnerabilities can really be at the local level, and the human factor is actually can actually be a great concern. We also discussing with civil society organizations. Some of them have expressed interest in this cyber hygiene, and in the future we are discussing with NDI on the possibility to train political parties. So the idea is to offer cyber hygiene basic training to all of the political stakeholders, all of the election stakeholders, and make sure there is a broad understanding of what are the elements that can make everybody a little bit safer online. And that applies also to media organization, obviously. So it's really looking at all the stakeholders that have a role in communicating with the public about election. The second recommendation was about increasing the capacity of the IT department, and that's something that is really, really critical. And they have highly specialized equipment, and they need specialized training. Since September, the IT department has started training. They've received 4 training already in information system security, and in several platforms that the CEC has acquired. We have also organized last week a tabletop exercise. So tabletop exercise are a cybersecurity and a security overall in general exercise where we simulate incidents, cybersecurity incidents, and we look at the way the management and the way the participants react to the simulation, and from there we potentially modify the response plan, the communication plan, according to the lesson learned from this simulation. So the first one was last week. It was a very interesting exercise, and that's something that I think will be interesting to repeat with more technical stakeholders, if possible. The cybersecurity awareness, so that's part of the training, the cyber hygiene training, and an overall, more broadly communicating about the risk awareness of cybersecurity. Replacing the hardware, the outdated hardware, during the assessment and also in 2014, outdated hardware has been an issue. So this is something that is being addressed right now, and new equipment will be in place before the presidential elections. In terms of the long-term recommendation, the collaboration was seen as a very important point, and I think on this there's a lot of effort that are being made, a lot of working groups that have been created. The CEC has started to work with international counterparts. They are meeting regularly, national counterparts as well. The SSSCIP, I hope I'm getting the acronym right, is working with the CEC. We're organizing a conference next week, IFES with the EU, with the support from USAID and UK Aid. It's a conference about cybersecurity and the elections in Ukraine. We have a lot of international experts that will be coming here from different countries, from different organizations, electoral commissions, international support organizations. And so a full day of discussion on Tuesday. On Monday, we will have more restricted expert group with several people from security and electoral commissions in Europe. We'll have a discussion with the CEC. So I think in terms of collaboration, really a lot of activities are ongoing, which is, I think really, really good. I think overall, if I may summarize a little bit on this recommendation, I think the CEC now is in a much better situation than it was even only a few months ago. And there's a lot of activities that are starting that are going to greatly reinforce their capacity to absorb the threats. Yeah, so I think that will be it for now.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Civil society experts, including OPORA, Civil Network, and Reanimation package of reforms have developed a roadmap of the Central Election Commission's reform, which contains a detailed cybersecurity component, and Jonathan has mentioned it in the beginning. Olha, I would like to turn it over to you for your elaboration on what are the priorities in this context according to this roadmap, and how do you assess, as one of the key civil society organizations promoting electoral reform, how do you assess Ukraine's readiness to face 2 national election cycles next year?
Good evening or afternoon. I don't know.
Morning.
Morning. Yes. I want to start from the personal data. 2 days ago, I got a message from Google Cloud. This is to inform you that the government-backed attackers may be attempting to compromise the account of user Olga Aivazovska. And my email, as emails from other NGOs in Ukraine, was blocked because of security and protection of the data from our mailing. You know, I'm going to compare the problems with the state security cyber issues and personal or political stakeholders security issues. And of course, civil society organizations as journalists or future candidates in political parties will be under attack. I'm really thanks for the big missions which visited Ukraine a few weeks ago from the USAID, NDI, and from European Parliament, and they prepared a good assessment about broader numbers of the problem which are going to be on the field during electoral processes, and few of them were about security, but not about hard or soft in Central Election Commission, but about manipulation and disinformation which can happen without security or personal security culture. You know, because in the USA, as I know, in 2016, some of the mailing were stolen by some of the people, and these databases were used by third parties against the candidates. This is the same level of problem as do not have good equipment in Central Election Commission, or do not have a good protocols for the, I don't know, reaction from the staff in Central Election Commission after some of the attacks to them. But the main problem, as for me, that we had some experience or examples when some of the groups, including the Central Election Commission, were under attack, but the society didn't have an answer what happened after that. For example, in 2014, the web portal of CEC was blocked, some of information were stolen, and in Russian media we saw that Dmitro Yarosh won the first round during presidential election and got 32%. Russia Today, or I don't know, NTV, I guess showed that in prime time in their TV channels, and this was a case how the data or how the manipulation with some of the information or with web portals or some tools can be used by third parties. But of course, after that, nobody believed or nobody trusted that it was happened, and that's why this attack, this information attack, wasn't successful. At the same time, in Ukraine, we do not know what happened with that criminal cases which were opened because of this example of attack, or who were from what side under the investigation. Nobody knows, and I'm sure that next time in 2019 we will have some of such examples. And you can't protect this without strong position of Central Election Commission. I'm very sorry that Tetiana didn't come. We had a big discussion about Donbass and security issues a few hours ago with a few members of CSC, and I'm sure that it's one of the part of one puzzle, you know, because private security or security of political stakeholders and institutions which will be managing the electoral campaign are on the same level, because you can have new equipment in the CSC building and very well trained staff at the same time when we are going to have numbers or tenses of candidates, and we are sure that some of them will have very close result. Nobody knows what will happen in disinformation or manipulation campaigning, or security or cyber attacks will be used only like a tool to stop, to have access to the truth and to official information from CSC, for example, when web portal was just stopped of working and nobody knows what was happening with database at that times. At the same time, I think that portals is one of the part of the problem, because we have the state database of voters, and this database might be under the biggest attack next time, because without voter list you can't organize any election day, you can't organize any elections. And can we imagine that someone just broke or will steal it and something will happen with that? I'm from civil society. We don't have access to the voter database, and we don't know what is going on with that. But we are worried that this database might be under attack, and this will be the biggest problem for procedures, for electoral process, and for e-days. At the same time, the question about policies and some protocols and culture, how to protect them, yourself or your institution against the cyber attacks, should be a part of activity or self-assessment campaigning in each of institutions which will be close to elections. In political parties, organization, in civil society organization, in media, and of course in CSC. Because in 2014, as we heard from the open source information, that some of some of the passwords were stolen from the open documents, Word documents, from the open laptops or computers in CSC. So it was so easy. And you know, when in 2014 I got a few cards from the people from National Security Council, I saw the mails and business cards. I saw emails, and the address was in Mail.ru, for example. I'm not sure that in each of political organizations we will not see the same, and somehow it can be used by third parties. At the same time, I'm not sure that it's enough to work with national political parties or groups or in CSC and their staff, because there are so many groups all over Ukraine, and unfortunately, if someone will want to break the scheme or communications channels and so on, they will start not from the head, you know, they will start from the field. Because, yeah, and our experience showed the same. If you are talking about security, you should think about fields, because it's so easy to block someone or to, I don't know, open the mailing and to use it for using more information from Kyiv, for example, or central offices.
Thank you very much, Olha. Thank you, Thomas, for your comprehensive remarks. Looks like there's still a lot of work to do to ensure that the next presidential and parliamentary elections will be secure from the cyber standpoint. And since we don't have Tetiana Slipachuk with us today, I would like to address one more question to both of you. As some of you know, on November 29th, Central Election Commission canceled elections in the unified territorial communities in 10 Ukrainian regions due to the introduction of the martial law. However, there is no clarity in the Ukrainian legislation. There is no procedure as to how to renew the election process after the cancellation happens. What steps, in your opinion, need to be taken to solve this issue? And do you have any information from the Central Election Commission as to whether it has any plan for the resumption of the election process in the regions?
First of all, Central Election Commission didn't cancel this election yesterday. They just shared information with Territorial Election Commission and local administration that there is a military state in tens of the oblast. So it's like Solomon's idea: do not say no or yes, but just share this information between stakeholders.
But
and each of stakeholders can qualify this information in their sites. You know, we saw the same in the 1st of November when CSC truly canceled elections in 4 amalgamated communities. 2 of them were on Donbas, one of them was in Zhytomyrsky Oblast and another one in Vinnytska Oblast. They just cut the name of these amalgamated communities from the act when they called these elections in October. Then civil society and my organization start to analyze the legal base for that. And you know, truly, there is no any legal procedures which give a chance or right CSC just cancel elections after that period when it was called according to legislation about amalgamated communities and procedures, which has connection only with this level of election. Then the CSC got 34 court decisions about cancelling of some of decision of city council level about united of these communities. And CSC understood that it's not good to have so many critics criticizing from civil society and some of the governmental organizations and ministers which are working with decentralization. And they did another way. They just shared information between local administration and Territorial Election Commission that we got some court decision and you can do what you can. The same scenario was used yesterday about military state that they just shared information between Territorial Election Commission about this situation.
It doesn't de facto mean that
it doesn't mean that this election will happen. But CSC, as a very smart institution for now, didn't answer yes or not personally because they do not want to take responsibilities after any decision. At the same time, Central Election Commission prepared the act how recall or what will be the procedure for the calling elections in amalgamated communities on the future. Because the previous scenarios were that CSC will got documents from the Oblast administration and twice a week will call elections all over Ukraine. At the same time, there is no clear answer according to legislation how to be with these elections in 10 oblasts. We are talking about 52 communities. Because according to the current legislation, we have position only about extraordinary or ordinary local elections, which should be recalled during 90 days after the end of military state. At the same time, according to Ukrainian legislation, there is another type of election, first elections in united communities, amalgamated communities. And this position wasn't included into law because the law was adopted before the decentralization reform. That's why the clear answer is only one. The parliament can adopt in the future the changes to legislation and to include the same procedure or another procedure for the legislation about amalgamated communities. I think that they have to include not 90 days for recalling this election, but 30, for example, because this election should be organized before presidential. It's not fair to organize it on the same day as presidential election, because we are going to have the end of decentralization reform, and it's another philosophy as a national campaign for presidential position. And to have the same election, these two elections in one day, it will be against some of the standards and rules, because the presidential campaign, advertising, and so on will be on top level. At the same time, the free and fair election on the local level, on the villages, will be on with bad background or political hating background, as we usually have on national level.
So does it mean that regardless of how the CEC statement is understood by the public and the media, on December 23rd, the elections will not happen, and it's up to the parliament to make changes to the legislation, and only after that, the new date for the elections can be decided on? Okay, that's not a good news, of course, but we will monitor these developments, and I think more international pressure and civil society pressure on the parliament is now critical to ensure that local communities will have a chance to continue with the decentralization of power and the budgeting process, which we were advocating for a long time. And now we're back to Washington for questions.
Thank you, and thank you to the two presenters and for providing deeper background on cybersecurity, the elections, some of the fallout from martial law, and I think it's important here to understand that there are some consequences already for this action. Of course, it's in a very difficult security environment. I did want to, Olena, just praise civil society. I know very quickly after the incident took place that you and others were mobilized to really be out there to speak to the dangerous security situation in terms of engagement. I know sort of our interaction of really urging the international community to stand with Ukraine, and I think that message was heard from your end and how important that is. And then on the other end, too, this urging of making certain that local elections take place is something that we're certainly hearing back here, and obviously to work with you and the government to support in ensuring that local elections take place. I think that's also critical, and of course, it's an example of what happens when you have this chain of reactions, because of this incident, which, frankly, from my perspective, is exactly where the Kremlin would like to see these things happen, is to create greater internal challenges within Ukraine, and to highlight, as they've always tried to highlight, that Ukraine is unable to function, and it's not a normal state. And I think in this case, we've already seen that type of propaganda, Kremlin propaganda related to martial law, as well, coming directly from Putin himself. So it's something really to watch. And I think in this case, I really wanted to ask, one, Thomas, you had mentioned that you thought that the CEC was making real steps in terms of cybersecurity. And I wanted to get your assessment, Olga, too, because I think I heard really a little bit maybe that they're in a much better place now than they were previously. But you raised some real red flags about local vulnerabilities, database vulnerabilities. I go back to you to ask you to, and I wish we had CEC there to sort of talk about what they feel like they've done, because I think it's important to bring them in. But maybe a grade on where you think they are right now, And then obviously, you've been working the report that IFES put out this summer. I know there's a lot of support from USAID, DFID, others, but maybe just an assessment of what are the gaps in terms of where the Ukrainian government is putting resources in, and if you feel like resources, I'm not suggesting that there needs to be additional resources, but if maybe you think that's the case, but where should the efforts be pushing towards? And when you look at the timeline between now and March 31st, is Ukraine going to be ready for this upcoming election, given all these challenges? And of course, even here in the United States, as I'm listening to you, we share these same difficult challenges. Some which I think maybe in some sense you're doing an even better job in Ukraine gearing up for. But of course, everybody looks at Ukraine as a space where a lot of Russian testing ground, election-related activities takes place. And so I just want to praise the work that you're doing in conjunction with both the government but also international partners, because you're also doing, I think, a service for all of us internationally who are trying to figure out how to address these challenges. So back to Kiev, and then what we're going to do is we'll open it up to additional questions and comments here.
Who would like to take this question? Both of you, I guess.
Thank you. Well, I would like to come back to something that Ola was saying a bit earlier. I think we need to learn the lessons from previous attack, from 2014 in particular. There are lots of things that are being mitigated now, but these attacks will happen again, and maybe they will happen with even more resources, with even more strength than before. So it's not only about gearing up the equipment, putting more DDoS defenses, it's also planning all of these things carefully. I mean, the website is going to be more protected against DDoS, but it's going to be attacked again, maybe a lot more than before. What if it falls? What are the contingency plans? How do you communicate with the public if your website is down? You use other channels, you use Facebook, you use Twitter, you use other news outlets. Then you need to plan for the worst. Even if you try to improve your defenses, it might not be enough. So I think there's a lot of lessons that needs to be learned from the previous attack. It's important to gear up the equipment, gear up the defenses, but also plan for the worst. I think that's an important one. I think in terms of what we were talking about, where all the efforts are being made right now, I would say that in terms of cyber hygiene and in terms of awareness, there cannot be enough training and enough communication with the public, with the stakeholders, with everybody. In my country, I think a couple of weeks ago, the Ministry of Interior released some cartoons for the public about cyber hygiene, about cybersecurity. I think there cannot be enough done with the media, with CSOs, with political parties, with the public in general, or on what are the dangers online, how it can affect democracy and elections, and also the other part, which I'm not discussing at all, the disinformation part. I think there cannot be enough awareness done in this domain. Yeah.
Thank you. Olga, what is the international response you would appreciate and expect?
So I think that the USA and European Union are supporting on the highest level the next election, and they invested amount of some of the resource for protection, because, for example, Ukrainian parliament didn't have enough time for including some money into budget and so on. But I don't think that we have to talk about resource as a financial resource or somehow the support in this level. I think that we do not have enough skills or sometimes experience to how to protect people's mind, not some technical infrastructure in the CEC against propaganda or disinformation, or how to develop critical thinking, but we don't have enough time for that, really. That's why we have to organize election in free and fair manner to protect what we can to protect as CEC databases, as official information, and so on and so forth. But I'm not sure that it will be enough. Because in Ukraine, as a country which has conflict or open war with Russian Federation, it's not so clear how to protect people. Because of this hating news, because of the disinformation, hating speeches, I don't know, unrelevant discussion about future of Ukraine, about policies, about populistic agenda, I think it will be more influential into Ukrainian election result than even DDoS attack or hacking of some of the infrastructural things. And for example, in this assessment after NDI and European Parliament report and visiting the mission, they included such recommendation as to open here Facebook office, to include some capacity of Google, and so on and so forth. It's very important, do not give a chance to use social media and some of other sources of open but sometimes very difficult information about political and security processes. For example, in Ukraine, I guess it will be first election when political advertising will have such big level of influence or such big level of coverage, but not from TV channels, but at the same time from social media. And unfortunately, not so many people can see even a framework or background of this information, because you can check the Facebook page from one of political party, but you will not see the content or the message which you are interested in. My colleague, one of my very well-known, not actor, presenter from TV, he is working with volunteer with army. He tried to collect some money and some equipment and to help for army. And his photo was used by one of the political parties, one of the Facebook page. And when he asked me to check the information and to prepare some official position or I don't know official assessment of that, I opened the page and I didn't see this message because I wasn't in their target group. The targeting of advertising were for one of the region and some of social groups. And we couldn't check this information before the time when the person from the target group just photo this message and send it through the messaging messengers.
Like print screen.
Yeah, this is the problem, that we can collect all the data about political advertising, about strategy and social media, and this looks like engineering. It's electoral engineering, and I'm not sure that in Ukraine there is capacity on some of the NGO or think tanks or analytical groups to collect all data and to understand what's going on. Because we will have results or changing of the ratings, but we don't know the source of this rating. This is a problem. When my organization collects the data about visiting of the regions from candidates or some events, advertising on billboards and media, we don't see all the data because now it's on the shadow part of communication. It's on social media. And unfortunately, not all of the networks can open all information for collecting the data. Of course, Facebook use these ads, and you can check some of the fields for advertising, but you will not see everything. And I'm sure that this is a part of the most dangerous cyber or disinformation issues for the next election. Not open hacking attacks, but disinformation through the media, and none of think tanks will collect all the data. That's why if, I don't know, Google, Facebook, or some think tanks from European Union, which are working with disinformation and so on, can help us, it will be very relevant, because we don't have all methodologies, so we have to do something from the road, you know, because we don't have much time.
Jonathan?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, do we have more questions from Washington?
We do. We're going to open it up to questions right now. I already saw some hands raised. Mike Henning. And just please identify yourself and the organization that you're with.
Hi, Olga and everyone in Kiev and Brussels. My name's Mike Henning. I'm with USAID in Washington. And I just wanted to echo one thing that Olga talked about and then ask a question of the two participants in Kiev. Absolutely agree from everyone's side that the part of cyber that we're not spending so much time talking about, which you just talked about, Olga, all these threats online, the disinformation, the manipulation of public opinion that can happen through trolling and all that, that's an enormous issue. And if you count that as a cyber threat, it's probably maybe more significant than direct manipulation of electoral systems. So I think that's an important point to make, but I don't know how far we'll delve into that here, because I wanted to focus to some extent on the hard cyber issues within government structures. We are working hard with our counterparts, USAID, other parts of the US government are working a lot with government counterparts in Ukraine on various issues related to their cyber defenses. And there are a lot of issues, and they were the things that happened in 2014 that Olga talked about earlier were kind of hushed up. Were not communicated about, were not followed up. That's not a great omen for the future. And Tom from IFES, I think Tomas emphasized communication is needed. And it's absolutely the case when you have unresolved issues, when you have problems, and then you don't have communication about that, it just raises both fear, legitimately, that there is a problem that's not being disclosed, and secondly, it's prime territory for that first thing I was mentioning, which is disinformation campaigns, attacking the credibility of the overall process, the whole public opinion, sort of manipulation that can be done. So I wanted to ask if our colleagues in Kiev or here have an opinion, and frankly, the absence of the election commissioner is maybe a sign. Is this new election commission, with its new members, going to be able to communicate better, going to get ahead of the game, and rather than just informing technical territorial election commissions, well, by the way, we're under martial law, good luck making a decision. Will they change? Will they be capable of getting in front of the news cycle and addressing things? Maybe during election day, they'll be very open and putting out lots of messages, but there's a lot of days between now and election day. And it would be important for the commissioners themselves, especially the chairperson, to speak out regularly and forcefully. That was a problem with the previous election commission. It's a problem with a lot of institutions in Ukraine on the government side. But when it comes to the election commission, that's going to be a fatal flaw. So we're very nervous about that. And I would welcome people's opinion.
Great. Well, back to Kiev.
Do you want to comment on that? Do you have any remarks? Thomas, would you like to comment?
Obviously, can't talk about on behalf of the commission, but I think there is work that is being done now, which I hope will bear fruits. Yesterday, I had a briefing with the commission on their new website, and I think their vision, the vision of the chairwoman and of the members, their vision of having a website that is that has information that is addressed to voters and to the public, I think it's a good sign of being more open to communication. And I think communication plans is something that the CEC is working on. And I think the tabletop exercise that we had last week showed that cybersecurity incidents really requires communication plans. These communication plans need to be tested, and they need to be properly put in place and understood by all stakeholders. So I can't talk on behalf of the CEC, obviously, but I think we are making progress towards a better communication.
Well, back to the first part of the comment from Washington. How open do you think the new CEC is, particularly the leadership of it?
It's a funny question for us, because the first official meeting of CEC was organized without media and any access from civil society to the room. This was a warning from us, and now we are very attentive for any of movements from CEC close something, or to adopt something without the comments, without the basic understanding what was the motivation or what was the legal position. Because they signed this first meeting without media when 7 TV channels were on the corridor and my colleagues were there. And we had to call to police, and it was a bad sign, really. But now they are under our control in good way, because we try to be more attentive. Attentive to their work. We try to organize online streaming of each of their meeting on our Facebook page, and everyone can see what is going on these seconds inside. That's why it's very important. And I think that the protection for CEC, political protection on the future, when they were under attack too, from political groups, from political stakeholders, from those candidates which were against the result, they will not be success on the results and so on, to be as open as it possible, to open all electoral data, to open all the data sets about electoral process results, numbers of electoral commissions, numbers of voters, and so on and so forth. It's very important, even if they do not think about that in that way, because it's not just good sign. It's the key for their own protection and independency, because their reputation is very weak, and this reputation is not their own, but as an institution of CEC, and they have to protect what they have and to rebuild this reputation for the next time.
Thank you, Olga. The first meeting we tried to organize jointly, RPR and OPORA, with the Central Election Commission just a week after it was approved. We invited 16 members of the CEC, only 10 of them confirmed, and only 3 of them came. Any luck getting them into your meetings in the recent month or two? Are they more accessible now for joint events and public engagements with the civil society?
Yes, now they are more friendly for civil society organization, and I'm very thankful for those international organizations and stakeholders who had attention on this problem from the first official meeting, because it was a key. Just show that you will have reaction because of your unfriendly position and unfortunately violation of legislation about CEC. Their own legislation was violated by themselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Olga. Do we have more questions from Washington now?
Yeah, we have a couple of hands raised here too. And again, if we just ask, we're going to probably take a couple together. I also want to then go to Brussels to offer them an opportunity to ask questions there as well. Nadia, can I turn it to you?
Sure. Well, I don't really have a question. I'm hoping to answer a question that was raised earlier about what is going on in Washington.
Can we just identify?
Oh, I'm sorry. Nadia Makano, U.S.-Ukraine Foundation. Obviously, just about everybody is focused on the Azov crisis. The Friends of Ukraine Network is an initiative of the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation, and we have several task forces. And yesterday we had sort of an emergency meeting of two other task forces. One is the National Security Task Force, which is chaired by Ambassador John Herbst, and then also Task Force on Economic, Energy, and Defense, which is chaired by Ambassador Roman Popodyuk. We are working on a statement and recommendations, and we have action plans that are going to be focused on 5 areas. One regarding NATO, the political situation, economic part, military, and also working with our allies. I think what I see from this discussion, I think it might be important for us to share the work that you are doing here in this task force with our other members, and also likewise what they are doing. I think particularly I was looking at the issue that was just raised regarding social media. We do have people on our National Security Task Force which are working in these areas, so I think there could be some things that we could do jointly. So thank you very much.
Adrian.
Hi, Adrian Karmazin, also of the US-Ukraine Foundation. My question was to Thomas. You talked about the simulation you conducted of a cyber attack and some others you will be conducting. I was wondering if you might be able to be a little bit more specific about some of the types of threats that you're looking for and preparing for. So I know you might not be able to be too specific, but just in a general way so we could understand what those threats might be.
Okay. Back to Kiev.
Thank you. No, so this the tabletop, the simulation we've conducted last week was a joint exercise with a lot of managers actually. We had the communication department, we had the IT department, and we had operations and commissioners. A few, like 3 to 4 people of each section. The idea of the simulation is to basically simulate an election day and inject cybersecurity events. They could be really simple tweets from a political party, or they could be really like technical hardware cyber attack on the critical infrastructure. The idea is to look at the group dynamics, look at how the communication happens, look at the communication plan, look at the disaster recovery plan, and make sure that everybody knows his role. We don't really simulate really technical simulation with with the equipment. That's another kind of exercise. Here we really wanted to work on the group dynamics, on the communication plan, and to make sure that everybody understands the role and the impact that an attack has on basically on everybody's job. And that's what I think it was an interesting exercise, just to understand what we mentioned, the importance of a communication plan that is understood by everybody. It's not enough to have the IT department respond to an incident. If it has an impact, the commission needs to communicate on it to the public. I think that's the message we wanted everybody to understand. Now, in terms, there are other types of simulation that like really simulate technical event. That's not something we've done, but I hope we'll be able to do with the CEC.
Thank you, Thomas. Back to Washington.
Wanted to thank you for those answers, but also just to turn it over to Sophia in Brussels to see if there's any questions in Brussels right now. Over to Brussels.
Thank you, Jonathan. Here is Brussels. I hope that you hear us well. We would love to thank you for the very interesting panels, and we're happy that we can continue the cooperation despite the fact that Ukrainian World Congress is not here today in Brussels. They initiated the idea to organize the trilateral roundtable between Washington and Kiev to discuss the future elections in Ukraine. And yeah, I wanted to mention also on that, because in the beginning you mentioned that you would love to hear the point of view of Brussels on the Kerch Strait conflict. So from my perspective, I can say that there was the reaction from Donald Tusk who is the president of the council, and 4 hours ago he tweeted that he assumes that there will be a second round of sanctions coming from the member states of the European Union. And as was mentioned before, Federica Mogherini as well expressed her concern with the situation, as well as President Tajani of the European Parliament also had expressed his concern. Not only the Council expressed that they will be having some actions in forms of sanctions to be implemented probably in December, so hopefully it will be done before Christmas. And I would love to ask our audience if anyone has any questions to the speakers. Seeing none, I have got 2 questions, if I'm allowed to ask. So my questions will be probably to both speakers from Kiev. And one of them will be concerning the observer missions. So I know that there is OSCE coming to Ukraine for the presidential elections to observe how they're going to take place there. And here in Brussels, we had the discussion in Microsoft on the elections and cyber attacks. And one of the representatives from the OSCE, he mentioned that they included cybersecurity dimension in their observing missions. So I would love to know if any of the speakers know about that and know that, or maybe any other observing mission, international one, has already been in touch with you and they already were talking about some cybersecurity dimension in their observing missions. And the second question will be concerning the Kerch Strait. If you think that, if you may have a chance to comment on that, because there are a lot of concerns among Ukrainian society that Poroshenko has implemented the martial law in order for his campaign to be benefited and in order not to have the elections and for him to have a longer period of being a president. And people are concerned basically with the fact why martial law today but not when the war started in 2014. So maybe you can also comment on that, because I believe that that's also something where people in Brussels are asking me about and what they're interested in. Thank you.
I can answer shortly to your question. First of all, we know about few missions which are going to come during next presidential election, and we had opportunity to speak with a small assessment mission from OSCE ODIHR already, which came to Ukraine a few weeks ago. And of course, big Canadian mission or Canadian mission will come next year, as we know, and ANIMO, European Network of Independent Organization, Civil Society Organization will come too. I hope that we will not have too many fake observers, because it's problem too when some people with the passports of foreign citizens or EU citizens can come and to talk about free and fair or unfree and unfair election, but without any arguments and any information from the field about that. So political motivated observation is a problem here too. That's why I hope that we will have a big mission, and of course many of Ukrainian civil society organizations are going to organize some of activity. For example, OPORA will have 200 LTOs, and we started to work with some of the issues and pre-election campaigning analysis from the 1st of October. So we will have 200 LTOs and one with 1,500 STOs, short-term observers, in election day, and we are going to prepare PVT, parallel vote tabulation, and so on. So we will have many facts about real situation on the field with electoral campaigning and with results after that, of course. And the second question was about Poroshenko motivation. I came from Warsaw a day ago, and I heard the same from Belarus NGOs, from Russian NGOs, from Azerbaijanian, and so on. I had a meeting with Eastern Partnership Organization and with few stakeholders which were a part of Russian organization, and now they're living in Vilnius and other countries, you know, because of Putin's regimes. And it's not fair because what happened in Azov Sea, it's not like a sign that something happened. It was a point which showed us that Ukraine already doesn't have a sea, that the sea was occupied by Russia, and Ukraine didn't have access to the ports in Mariupol, Odessa, and so on. It was like a final argues that we lost the sea. That was a problem. And if you will support these politically motivated statements or hearing about unfair decision to have military state, I think that you have to continue that Poroshenko and Putin has direct agreement between themselves. If you do not have such facts, please do not share this full information, because it's just killing us politically. Please do not share this stupid information.
Okay. Any more comments or questions from Brussels?
No comments. I mean, I personally didn't believe that, but I just expressed something which I was reading in the media. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophia.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would. It's back to Washington. I have one question, and we're going to direct it here in Washington to State Department colleague. And I think, frankly, too, I wanted to just maybe get, and not to put you on the spot, just in terms of sort of the U.S. Position and sort of the concerns that have been raised. And I certainly want to give you a moment to speak to these issues, given the concerns and the challenges, both on the elections, but what's taken place, which has obviously been a major focus here in Washington. So we could, if that's okay. Thank you.
Hi, Brad Fredden. I'm the director of the office in the State Department that's responsible for Ukraine, Moldova, and Belarus. Obviously, most of our time, especially this week, is spent on Ukraine. Our view is that the Russian actions in the Sea of Azov were just another example of ongoing aggression against Ukraine that started in 2014. It's in many ways it's an escalation of that aggression because they have admitted openly to this attack. There are no little green men or so-called separatists. These are actual Russian FSB people firing on Ukrainian ships. We believe that what they did was illegal under international law, or regardless of of the status of the Sea of Azov, whether it's an inland waterway or an international waterway. Either way, closing that strait is a violation of international law. We're deeply concerned. We are working closely with allies and partners in Europe to bring pressure on the Russian government, at least in the short term, to release the Ukrainian sailors and ships. That's our first priority, is to get those people home and get those boats back. We're consulting with our partners on the next steps, so I don't know precisely what those are going to be. But we're deeply concerned, and we're very pleased to see our European partners being proactive and taking action. We're very supportive of that, and we're in close consultation with them. On the election issue, we expect Russia to use every tool in its toolkit to try to influence the outcome of the elections, including cyber, media manipulation, disinformation, the whole gamut of tools. And we're working with we discussed this week before last at the Strategic Partnership Commission with our Ukrainian partners last Foreign Minister Klimkin and a team from Ukraine. We're working closely to try to help Ukraine ensure that these are free and fair elections, and to minimize and counteract any foreign influence. We have a USAID has a $10 million program with the Central Election Commission. The embassy in Kyiv has an election task force that is focused on working with the Ukrainian government and civil society to do everything possible. I know there are also some important private sector efforts that we're coordinating with, and you mentioned one of them. The Atlantic Council has a project. I believe Google Jigsaw has a project or is proposing a project in Ukraine where they work to develop countermeasures for identifying false social media accounts. But there's a real concern in Washington and a real across the government effort to try to help Ukraine.
Can I just, since you're here, one of the immediate steps that the task force identified was to urge, and perhaps it's already being considered, that Secretary Pompeo being a ministerial meeting, particularly of the countries around the Black Sea, that is perhaps should have a separate strategy, especially because of the issues with or concerns regarding Turkey. So I don't know if that's already being planned, but if it isn't, we hope you consider it.
We're certainly consulting with them individually, and I'll take that back as a proposal. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the. Olena, do you have something back to Kiev?
Yeah, Jonathan, unfortunately, we have to let Olga go because she has an interview on the TV in a few minutes, but I'd like to thank her for participation, and we can continue for a few more minutes, of course.
Okay. I think actually we're right up against the time frame for this task force meeting, and I wanted to, Olena, maybe just turn it back to you for closing remarks. And again, I think we thank you greatly. You've been so critical to pulling all of this together, and we're looking forward to we're hopefully planning to have a next round in December as well, another meeting, the third meeting. But I'm going to turn it over to you in Kiev for closing remarks.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you, colleagues and partners, for participating in this event today, especially since today is the International Computer Security Day, which makes this event especially more timely. And we want to thank you for all the continuous Western assistance to Ukraine, and to call for your further political support of our reform efforts and the restoration of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, of course. We plan to continue holding these events, as Jonathan said, on a regular basis, and encourage you to participate in them in the future. Besides, in order to keep you up to date before these monthly video conferences and enable better information exchange, we encourage you to subscribe to our international newsletter and reform alerts and analytical reports that we are sharing, and to address any questions or inquiries you may have regarding the situation in Ukraine to us at the RPR, and colleagues at the GMF will follow up with a note on how to join the online directory of this task force, and to keep in touch with us for further information exchange. With this, I would like to thank you all again, and hope to see you at our future events, next one of which will take place in December, and further information will be sent out in the coming weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and also to thank you to all the participants here in Washington, including U.S. government officials who are, scrambling to address challenges in Ukraine this week. It's been a busy week in Washington, an important focus. And this is, of course, for the task force here and working with U.S.-Ukraine Foundation, we'll be, right there with others until we get additional responses, and hope to see Ukrainian soldiers and sailors back in Ukraine. And this is certainly going to be a focus going forward. And we plan on sending out some additional information for people to be able to sign up in terms of information, but also we also welcome your own content as well to this process. It's going to be along several months of elections in Ukraine, And obviously the issues, security issues in the region seem to be obviously flaring up again. It will be something that we'll continue to watch. So just again, thank you to everybody for being here and for participating in Brussels as well. Really appreciate that. And of course, there are those that are online viewing this live stream, and we appreciate their participation and listening in as well. So thank you. Have a good weekend in Brussels and Kiev, and we look forward to our next session of the task force. Thank you.
Thank you.